Hello everyone, I am the Comics Kid 2099. After taking a week off from watching and reviewing the 2002 science fiction television series Firefly, I'm back to talk about the third episode of this series, titled Bushwacked. In the past, when I've watched this series, this episode has always been my least favorite. I think the episode is maybe better than I've given it credit for in the past, but my reason for not liking it as much as I've liked some of the other episodes in the series still stands. I have always thought the themes of this episode were always hitting the audience in the face much more than any other episode in this series. Exactly 3 times we hear different characters talking about civilization in one way or another, which really is the most non-subtle way of hammering home what exactly this episode is about. Civilization, civilized, civility, etc. Now, I should go ahead and say that even though the theme of this episode is spelled out just a little too much, I do think that this is a very solid episode that is executed very well. You've got a couple of little moments for characters that pay off very nicely, while I would almost hesitate to say that any of the characters really go through a traditional character arc in this episode. The one character who does go through any sort of noticeable change is the captain of the Alliance cruiser that takes the crew of the Serenity prisoner briefly. When we first meet him, he's doing everything by the book. These people are prisoners, and he's taking them in for what he sees as several crimes, many of which are legitimate. But after seeing that Mal saved his life and was telling the truth about not having any part of one of the crimes, we see the effects of the man's character arc, even if we don't actually get to see him go through it exactly. But before I go further, I should quickly cover the plot of the episode. The crew of Serenity comes across a dead ship that was hit by reavers, but they don't know that just yet. They come aboard to steal supplies and also check on any survivors, if any exist. They come across one survivor, they bring him aboard as well as the stolen supplies, and then the Alliance cruiser comes in. They begin to arrest the crew, and then the survivor of the ship that was hit by the reavers begins attacking the Alliance doctors. We find out from Mal that when someone is witness to such atrocities, the only way he can cope with that is if he becomes the atrocity. Okay. So then Mal helps the Alliance guy stop the surrogate reaver, the Alliance destroys the dead ship and the cargo. End episode. I have major issues with the whole concept behind this episode. If a man somehow survives a reaver attack, he becomes a reaver? Really? This might have worked better if we were never told the origins of the reavers when we got to the movie, but knowing the exact reason why the reavers exist makes the origins of this particular wannabe reaver kinda silly, at least in my mind. I wouldn't necessarily have a problem with the idea of a man who witnessed his family and friends get slaughtered going mad and then trying to kill everyone else. That's more or less a nice and simple kind of story idea. But what pushes it into ridiculous is that he wants to become a reaver himself. To make matters even worse, Mal tries to suggest that the reavers who hit this ship deliberately left this man alive and forced him to watch the hecatomb. Why? Why would the reavers do this? I get that we don't have actually that many episodes that even mention the reavers. This episode and the pilot are, as far as I am aware, the only ones that even touch on this concept. But in the pilot, we are led to believe that the reavers eat, kill, and rape their victims. At no point are we told that they are psychologically devious enough to leave their victims alive intentionally. This would be all fine and good if the pilot episode and the movie were consistent with this version of the reavers that we see in this episode. As is, when watching this episode, it's just about easier for me to pretend that the survivor was hiding in the air vents or something, and that the reavers didn't even know that he was there. It's contradicting what we're shown and told, yes, but what we are shown and told is kinda stupid. I also want to take this moment to talk a little bit about the reavers themselves. I wanted to touch on this in my review of the pilot episode, but after some 20 minutes of talking about the pilot, I thought my feelings could wait. Since this is the only other episode that features the reavers, now is as good of a time as any to go into what I wanted to talk about. In my review of the pilot episode, I made the case that Firefly is a science fiction retelling of the end of the American Civil War, with the Browncoats playing the part of the Confederate States of America and the Alliance playing the part of the Union. The ideology even kinda matches up with what little we've seen of the reasons for the war being fought in Firefly. The Alliance wants to unite every colonized planet under one rule, while the United States of America, more than anything else, wanted to keep what was one nation as one nation and not let any of the states slip away, making them look weak. And the Browncoats, they want independence, although everything we are ever told about what the Browncoats wanted is from the mouth of former Browncoats like Mal and Zoe, so we're not entirely sure if we can trust what they say. If the Alliance captain in this episode is to be believed, even a little bit, then there were certainly some Browncoats who weren't quite as wholesome as Mal and Zoe might have you believe they were, at least during the war. So anyway, if this is what Firefly really is, then what does that make the Reavers? Well, this is a little bit awkward, but that would make the Reavers the Native Americans, yes? Granted, not all Native Americans were hostile to white men back in the day, and the timeline is a little bit off. By the time of the American Civil War, the Native Americans were more or less permanently displaced from their homes and were just living in whatever scraps they were thrown by the United States of America. It was roughly a century before the Civil War when some of the Native American tribes openly attacked the white men, and even then you could easily argue that they had a good reason to do so. So to say that the Reavers are a straight-up analog of the Native Americans from the generic Old West genre, that's oversimplifying it a little bit. But if you look at some of the more oversimplified Old West stories, especially the ones from back in the, let's say 1960s and a little earlier, it wasn't all that strange to see a very black and white representation of that time period. Good guys are the cowboys, bad guys are the Indians. It was only later, probably starting around the 1980s, when this was really being subverted. But maybe, just maybe, this oversimplification is what the creators of Firefly are going for. I can't speak with certainty because I wasn't there, but I wonder if lumping all of the air quotes savages into one big category and saying that they are all evil rapists who will murder your daughter is intentional. Not to perpetrate racism in modern entertainment, but maybe to try and subtly raise awareness of past racism. It's entirely possible I'm just looking way too much into this, so you can just take what I say for a grain of salt. But I wonder if the people behind this show, with their Reavers, are trying to say, this is not okay and it was never okay. I suspect maybe the Reavers, for those of us who are watching this series as a version of the Old West kind of story set in outer space, if these characters are meant to make us a little bit uncomfortable, and are not unintentionally doing so. And for people who do not see this as an updated version of the Civil War, well, they can look at the Reavers as just exciting bad guys for this series. Oh well, it's really just wild speculation on my part in any case. If you do try to look at this whole series too hard and place every single element as a counterpart to the historical West or the fictional Old West, it doesn't exactly work, and even if it did, the Reavers as the savage evil Indians doesn't really work when we get their origin in the film. But that's neither here nor there. Anyway, I mentioned that none of the main characters really go through an arc here, and I maintain that this is true. We do get to see another dimension to Mal, which is nice, but it's not really him going from point A to point B, which is how I usually see a character arc progressing. It's really more of a thing where we didn't know something about him, and with this episode we find out what it was. Several of the ladies on the ship are quite smiley to see that Mal is willing to let Book and Simon go and put the dead bodies in the other ship to rest, and they act like this is a new side to Mal that they've never seen. And it could be that I've seen this episode before, so it doesn't really surprise me, but after seeing Mal twice now in the previous 2 episodes make a decision that could potentially come back to bite him in the keister, but he does it anyway because it's the right thing to do, I am not so much surprised by his allowing Book and Simon to do this. At least not as much as Anara and Kaylee are. What did surprise me was seeing Mal more or less ally himself with a member of the Alliance. It could be that, after the pilot, the networks wanted Mal to be a little more softened, and so the people behind this show opted to tone down Mal's hatred of the Alliance. But this was the shocking part of the episode, at least for me. And I don't quite call it a character arc, because we don't really see Mal talking about the blasted Alliance and how he hates them or something. He just does it because it wouldn't be the right thing to let a man, even one working for the Alliance, die at the hands of a madman. Compare this to the previous episode, where he goes from saying that he will do the job for Niska, no matter what it is, and then he turns himself around on that when he discovers the circumstances of the job that he's committed. Maybe I'm just not looking at this right, but I'm not making any complaints. I think the episode is still a very solid one. I just don't see any real character movement except for the Alliance captain. Overall, like I said earlier, I think this episode is better than what I used to give it credit for. I do think the themes did not have to be so overtly spelled out for us, and I am not so much of a fan of the execution of the Sorta Reaver storyline. But this is still a very solid episode in my humble. I do hope you guys thought so as well, and if you agree, feel free to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more awesomeness from this channel. And if you did not like this episode, I also would love to hear your feedback on that as well. In the meantime, I will end the video here, and I will try to be back next week with another review of an episode of Firefly. Until then, don't forget to come back every other day in this week for more videos. I'll see you later.